Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our fifth and final webinar in our series on climate. My name is Sister Maria Pascuzzi, the director of Spirit Alive, which is an educational institute concerned with the theology and faith today. Our programs are made possible by the generous support of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, a generous grant from the Rasco Foundation, and your donations, for which I am always very grateful. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, let me repeat a few announcements, which I'm sure you've heard before, but if you're joining for the first time, perhaps you haven't heard this. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat box at any time during the presentation, and those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation this evening. To our many registrants who are joining us tonight and those present who would like to listen to the presentation again, please know that this session is recorded and will be posted on the Spirit Alive YouTube page. But please, as I remind you every week, allow about 72 hours for Matthew, our tech person, to do the editing and post the recording. The easiest way to access the recordings is to go to the Spirit Alive homepage and just click the recordings button, and you will be taken to the library of recordings, and you'll see each of the recordings in this series and all previous series. So thank you. In the past four presentations, we have listened to the alarming facts about the climate crisis. We were further challenged by the call to ecological conversion. We considered the social impact of the climate crisis, especially as it affects the poor and marginalized in our world. And last week, among other things, we were invited to think about ways to hold the church accountable to practice what it teaches with regard to addressing the global climate crisis. Now we need to ask, what do we do with all of this information? How do we work to transform the church, society, ourselves, to ensure the care of Earth, our common home? To help us with these questions and much more, we are fortunate to have with us tonight Erin Lothes Biviano. Erin received her doctorate in systematic theology from Fordham University. She holds a master's degree in theology from Boston College and a bachelor's degree in English from Princeton University. Dr. Lothes is a researcher in the field of energy ethics and a scholar of faith-based environmental movement. She is the senior manager of the Laudato Si Animators Program with the Laudato Si Movement, which some of you know as what had been formerly the Catholic Global Climate Movement. Erin is also a visiting scholar at the Center for Ethics at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Her many publications include 2 books some of you might have already read: Inspired Sustainability, Planting Seeds for Action, and her earlier book, The Paradox of Christian Sacrifice, The Loss of Self, The Gift of Self. She has authored a number of energy ethics essays and articles on faith-based environmentalism for both scholarly journals and popular outlets. Most recently, she authored the commentary and introduction to the Orbis Books publication of Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Laudate Deum. Dr. Lothes has participated in the activism of the interfaith environmental and divestment movement since 2003. So we welcome her warmly tonight as she considers transforming the church and society through care for our common home. Erin, thanks for taking the time to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Maria. It's wonderful to be with you and the entire Spirit Alive community. I'm delighted to be joining this tremendous conversation series that has been unfolding all fall with so many gifted scholars sharing their tremendous insights. And following upon what they have already shared, allows me to bypass some of the key themes in Catholic care for our common home and reflect most particularly on some of the challenging dynamics that need to be addressed in order to allow that transformation to happen. Our stated topic here today is how change can happen and what's already being done. And I think the tremendously good news is so much is being done. I could spend hours sharing with you the news of plans and activities and transformations all around the world. And that is a joyful and hopeful thing to know. What I hope to do that will be empowering for us, wherever we may be in the world, is to discuss those issues that challenge further transformation, perhaps, and especially root them in a sense of our Catholic faith. So once again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be with you. Thank you for your presence. So transforming the church and society through care for our common home. When we think about faith, really in its deepest sense, faith is a story. And I think about our fathers and mothers in the faith, all the way back to the family of Abraham, and how they must have passed down the story of their faith, sitting around the campfire, sharing these ancient tales. My father was a wandering Aramean, and he, along with his family, went down to Egypt and lived there. And you can hear the children picking up these stories and the families coming to know who they are and what is the meaning of their lives with their God. So we are in a time of climate crisis. And what is the story we are hearing about it? What is the story of our faith and the climate crisis? And then how might our Catholic tradition hand over treasures old and new from our rich intellectual tradition, spiritual tradition, and our tradition of scholarship to weave a new story that can help us live and flourish in the times we are confronting? So one of the stories we hear is the great tragedy and assault upon Mother Earth, what is happening to our common home, the suffering, the pain, the hunger, the drought, the climate, refugees. And we all know this story. It's a very painful one to hear. And you've had some opportunity earlier in this series to really learn about the science of it. So I won't repeat that here. We know about the story of global inequality. You've had the opportunity to learn about environmental racism, the incredible imbalance between the usage of energy and resources from the global north that has impoverished and degraded the global south. And we see how important it is to understand this new ethical category of ecological debt, knowing that inequity affects not only individuals, but entire countries. This map shows in the top image of the world, those nations that have historically emitted the most greenhouse gases, and they are distorted to show that. So the United States, the global north, especially in Europe, and then the lower map shows those countries that are experiencing the greatest impacts of climate change. We can see it right here in New York City where I live, the impact of air pollutants from bus depots, from garbage incinerators, from cars and trucks idling, from all of the energy polluting sources in our city here and around the world, and how it affects not only the climate, but how it affects the neurodevelopment of children in the womb, how it affects birth outcomes, how it leads to asthma, how asthma leads to reduced school attendance, lower success rates in school, cancer, lung issues among the elderly and the vulnerable. The list goes on and on. And then for some, the impacts of climate change are not so indirect and indistinct as maybe a haze in the air, but it's a bullet to the heart. There are environmental martyrs, dozens every year, probably 250 or more, many go uncounted, who are massacred because they protest the exploitation of the resources in their homelands. You may all be familiar with Sister Dorothy Stang, who was shot holding her Bible as she was walking through the Amazon forest, where she was a defender of the indigenous people's rights to their own resources. We see our own forests threatened. Now there is a wildfire season in many parts of the country. Our own New York region has been seeing brush fires and smelling the smoke. And what story do we tell about these experiences? Do we tell a story of community resilience, of people who fight back, who conquer the fire, who care for each other, who bring blankets and food and rebuild? Is this a victory? Or is this a rebuilding that resists the energy for change? We have to be very aware of the narratives and the stories that follow in the face of even the disasters we confront, because sometimes not even seeing the impacts can lead to change if our story is, well, we rebuilt and it's better than ever. Many of us recall the devastation that Hurricane Sandy left on the Jersey Shore and parts of Long Island. Our response cannot be, let's rebuild. So what if the story were, let's imagine tomorrow's world? How could we imagine a new world with the changes that we long to see? Pope Francis in Laudato Si offers a theological protest to all of the terrible stories I began my presentation with. Against this suffering and this injustice, he insists that the spirit of life dwells in every living creature, that creation is of the order of love, that the rich and poor have equal dignity and their rights must be guaranteed. This is a very powerful statement. The rich and poor have equal dignity and their rights must be guaranteed. Who is to guarantee their rights? Someone told me a story recently of a person who was driving along the highway and a giant tree, a giant log had fallen in the road, and the driver had to swerve madly out of the way. And as they recovered themselves and continued on, the driver muttered in shock and fear, "Somebody must do something about that log." And their passenger said, "Well, you are somebody." So how are we to respond? We think of Mary telling the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." We have been told it is our obligation to care for the beautiful creation God has given us. It is neither optional nor secondary. Through countless magisterial texts, many of which have been reviewed for you in this series. So the image I love to consider is that of Simon of Cyrene, lifting the suffering off the future generations. So what is your hope for our common home? What is the story you would like to see come to life? My story as an environmental theologian began in Newark when I saw an invitation to join the New Jersey Catholic Coalition for Environmental Justice. This was in 2003. And this very small group of about 6 people gathered to call themselves a statewide coalition. And our inspiration didn't come from Laudato Si, which had not yet been written, but we found the guiding texts in the Catechism, in St. John Paul II, and in other writings, and in the evidence of our eyes and the signs of the times. As I looked around, I could see, as many can, the suffering that was already beginning, that scientists were already telling us about long before 2003, and perceiving that these changes to our climate would soon only intensify the hunger, the dislocation, the insecurity that our church works so hard to relieve in so many of our ministries. The work of Catholic Charities around the world has always been to care for those who need help. And it just seems so clear that climate change would make so much more suffering for everyone and challenge all of this work. And my question was, why isn't more being done? And you can see here the picture of the New Jersey Turnpike, those unforgettable energy transformer plants when you go by Elizabeth, New Jersey. So I began to research this and found that teachings that clarify the relationship of our faith to care for our common home are critical. And they're numerous. We have so many. But still, often less is done than we would like. Now, people do need to hear these teachings. How shall they hear without a preacher? And where is this being taught? Is it being preached in the churches? Is it being shared in the seminaries? It is, this teaching about ecological responsibility is certainly moving through our universities, colleges, and elementary educations, but there's so much more to do to evangelize the church. So in my research, I discovered the gaps that challenge responses, a very important phenomenon of the greenwashing trap, and then the problem of prioritization, which I believe can be met with the gift of creative sacrifice. So let me move into these themes. By talking to many, many environmentalists around the country from multiple faith traditions, listening to their experiences as they worked to take action within their own faith communities, Catholic and other, I heard so many repeating themes. And when boiled down, they basically came down to these 3. The knowledge gap. I'm not convinced or concerned that there is a climate crisis. The caring gap. I know it's happening, but I'm conflicted. And then the action gap. I care, but what can I do? So the knowledge gap, as Professor Strawa indicated, in many ways results from our cognitive structures. First of all, there are scientific literacy limitations that are serious in our country. Just deep, deep lack of knowledge about basic science and certainly about climate science, which is admittedly confusing and complex and not easily seen in front of you. It's not like a frog to dissect on a plate where you can look at it, you know. Then there are cognitive limitations. New ideas don't easily sink in. Personal frames and personal values actually screen out the data people receive. Catherine Hayhoe, the great climate communicator and evangelical climate scientist, has shared the research that people who go out into their backyard and are asked how hot it is will answer differently based on their political persuasion. So the frames that we have, our worldviews, our preconceptions prevent us from receiving data. Then there's personal inclination. What are people naturally interested? What are their hobbies? Are they bird watchers or are they model airplane builders? Maybe the model airplane builder spends a little less time observing nature. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just a person who will possibly have less contact with nature. And then there's willful ignorance as a moral limit to knowledge. Because if we allow ourselves to know, we might recognize the moral obligation and feel we have to take action. Finally, the pain of the earth's degradation exists as an existential limit to knowledge. Sometimes there's only so much we can take in. It's overwhelming. So here's an example of that framing in place and the way people may receive something. The tide is wicked high in Boston, and here at the downtown wharf, people are enjoying their cocktails or enjoying their fish and chips. They've all got their feet up as the waiter sloshes through the tides 2 feet higher than normal, walking around with garbage bags on his feet, but life goes on. Then the caring gap discusses how I understand there's a climate problem, but I'm conflicted. You know, I'm torn in different directions. Consumerism is such a factor in our lives. Some of my interlocutors describe this as an onslaught, a seduction. They could not get away from it. Then there's always a desire to keep in step with progress. The latest iPhone, the newest acquisition, the things that take our money and time rather than maybe some of the aspects of the simpler life. Distraction, we all know we are hideously distracted. We've got our phones, we can't pay attention to what's happening outside. And maybe just disinterest. Not so important to me. The action gap is when someone knows and cares, but can't quite move to that moment of action by being too busy. We all need convenience in our lives. We're all overrun. By being comfortable. Some of those I interviewed said, well, you know, sometimes I'm lazy. Being habituated to the way things are, even perhaps in a mode of addiction, and again, being overwhelmed, feeling that terror of impotence. So those are the gaps that can keep us all from taking action. It's essential also to note the trap of the carbon footprint. We're often urged, reduce your carbon footprint. That is what we must do to care for the earth. But it's essential to know that the concept of the carbon footprint was developed deliberately by British Petroleum as part of a public relations campaign in order to shift the blame for fossil fuel pollution away from the corporations and on to the individuals. That makes people feel guilty about their traveling, home heating, other uses of fossil fuels and derived products, rather than pointing the finger back on the industries that produce this ecocidal product and are working to prevent us from uprooting it from our economic and political systems. And this is a recognition that Pope Francis was very clear about in Laudate Deum. He was very clear about the complicity that we all face, writing, while the powerful employ deception such as promoting the idea of the carbon footprint to perpetuate the status quo of fossil fuel infrastructure, self-deception is also convenient for everyone who benefits from their present lifestyle. So given this, it is not that difficult for powerful interests to take advantage of personal deception to evade strong action. So what does strong action look like? Replacing the plastic? Absolutely. This is essential. Plastic is the future that the fossil fuel companies are moving into. They are increasing their productions of plastics, which are toxic, which are affecting communities. And when they go into landfills, they are leaching those toxins into our groundwater. Plastic is the new coal, fundamentally. Now, we can find ways around plastic. For example, I have my hand soap. This is a glass bottle. You fill it with water, you add a little tablet, and you get soap. I have a compostable toothbrush. This is made of bamboo. I stopped buying shampoo in a plastic bottle. This is actually a bar of conditioner. It rests on a little soap dish that is made out of compressed cornstarch with a bamboo rack. You all remember the rag bag. We don't need those paper towels. There's the rag bag. Okay, so there's so many ways to get rid of plastic. However, we are told continually, recycle the plastic. But only 9% of plastic gets recycled. And by continuing to purchase it and imagining that we are recycling it, the fossil fuel companies can continue to market, produce, not to mention ship their plastic. Is reconnecting with nature the answer? Yes, this is essential. We must nurture our ecological spirituality, recapture our relationship to God, the Creator, find the solace in the natural world that gives us the strength to imagine tomorrow's world in new ways. However, once again, this is not enough. I'll never forget picking up the West Side newspaper and reading an article about how to fight climate change. And a very perceptive person said, we're not going to yoga our way out of this. So what do we need to do? This is an old graph from 2014. And this is the graph that converted me into an energy ethics scholar and a divestment advocate. What this graph does is show models of different energy mixes. And by an energy mix, I mean a combination of coal, gas, oil, nuclear, biomass, and other renewables. And each of these columns is a particular model that a particular group of scientists said, I think this is the model of 2050. I predict this is the model of 2100. And you can see that there are 6 different models. Okay, so this is a comparative graph of different ways to imagine the future, strictly from an energy point of view. And on what is my right side of the screen over here, if you can see it, over the words 70% probability of an increase of at most 2 degrees Celsius. What we see here is if by 2100, we are to have a 70% probability of an increase of at most 2 degrees Celsius, we must have 50 to 75% renewable energy. As you can see by the length of the green and the light green bars. All of these green and light green bars, no matter the model, account for 50 to 75% of the energy mix. That will get us to a 70% probability of an increase of at most 2 degrees Celsius. So this is a very technical and challenging slide, but when I finally wrapped my head around it, it was my moment of energy ethics conversion. The scales fell off my eyes, because if you had the opportunity to board a plane with a 70% probability of arriving safely at your destination, would you get on that plane? I would not get on that plane. And 2 degrees is not a safe destination. The nations of the world are fighting very hard to keep us to a 1.5 degree temperature increase. We are already at a 1.1 temperature increase. And what we are seeing now is not safe. So we must radically replace the energy in our system with renewable energy. We certainly cannot yoga our way out of this. However, okay, in 2020, renewable energy accounted for 12% of total US energy consumption and 19% of total energy consumption. So we have electricity consumption. We have a long ways to go. Good news is it is increasing. And the better news is it is affordable. Renewable energy is more and more affordable, way undercutting traditional energy sources in so many markets. Plus, there are a whole diversity of markets. This is one of my favorite photos. These are the Solar Sisters. They are entrepreneurs, women in Africa, who empower each other to become vendors of solar stoves and solar lamps, so they can cook without indoor pollutants, and children can do homework at night using solar lamps without indoor pollutants, and it becomes an industry for the women. So this is a moral imperative to make this energy transformation, and Laudato Si and Laudate Deum articulate it very clearly. Let us move to Laudate Deum, which was published only last year. The Pope writes that energy transition will only be fair if it is efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored in a process that is drastic, intense, and counts on the commitment of all. It's time for drastic and intense, because we need to radically scale up those proportions of renewable energy. And remember, the obstacle that we are facing, not only in the natural human psychology, the knowledge, caring, and action gaps, but in the trap of the carbon footprint, where the fossil fuel companies are attempting to evade their responsibility and make it look like ours. So what we really need to do, instead of focus on the carbon footprint, is use one's advocacy footprint. This is what creates the real change, not just attempting to recycle a plastic bottle, knowing that it has less than a 1/10 chance of getting recycled, but to advocate for the cessation of the production of plastics. So truly, living simply is a sign of solidarity. And it's a way to live our ecological conversion. And all of these beautiful practices begin to inculcate the virtues, which become the habits, which become a new way of life and a new culture. But what is essential for all of us to do is to change our paradigm from the sustainability carbon footprint to the advocacy footprint, so we can articulate the new story that we want in our church, in our society. That means voting, writing to your representatives, meeting with officials so they hear from you about the new civilization you wish to see, one that is healthy, one in which children do not get asthma, one in which 1 out of 5 deaths globally is not attributable to fossil fuel pollution, as research from the Harvard School of Public Health has demonstrated. We need to shift our investments to impact investing, and we need to educate others. And here we are all tonight sharing in the process of education, which is the fundamental transforming gift. So there's a time to be silent and a time to speak, and the time to speak is now. So we can take our inspiration from St. Catherine of Siena. I tell you, in the name of Christ crucified, that you must use your authority. It is time to talk about climate change. Your questions, your concerns, what you hope for, what you wish would take place, because sociologists tell us that 1 out of 3 Americans never talks about climate change. Never talks about climate change. That is phenomenal. Without talking about a problem, we cannot solve it. And so people think that others don't care, that it's not a concern, but it is. The vast majority of Americans and people in all countries at even higher levels than most Americans are very concerned. So free yourself to speak. Talk about this problem that we are facing, which is also an opportunity to build tomorrow's world. And we can engage the renewable energy of trusted parish moral authority and whatever communities you have. Congregations have the advantage of a built-in moral orientation. People are willing to examine and change their behaviors. There is a diffusion of norms. New practices pick up. If all of a sudden the coffee hour is held with actual mugs and people take turns washing them, people will remember that at their summer barbecues, and maybe they won't be bringing out the styrofoam. In a congregation, you have the companionship and encouragement of friends to work together, because this can be a challenging and difficult issue to address. And as a faith community, we have the inspiration of hope and the virtue of persistence. So truly, much can be done. And here is the part where I really could spend hours telling you and sharing with you how much can be done and how much is being done. And this is just a small sample, primarily within the Catholic world, but these are tremendous models. I'd like to share with you the Laudato Si Action Plan, which many of you may be familiar with. It is an official project of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. And it is an invitation for every family, individual, parish, diocese, university, and community or business to seek advanced sustainability. And this invitation has been sent from the Vatican to every diocese of the world. It is a phenomenally coordinated and in-depth program. And of course, you can learn more at your leisure at Laudato Si actionplatform.org. What this platform seeks to do is respond to the cry of the earth, respond to the cry of the poor, revolutionize our ecological economics, adopt sustainable lifestyles, pursue ecological education, deepen our ecological spirituality, and grow community resilience and empowerment. And so when you join the Laudato Si Action platform, you join a community around the world that is journeying together to do this. And you will be sent invitations to webinars and guidelines, and it's deeply metrics-based. It is rigorously metrics-based so that the changes people make can be assessed. And communities around the world are posting and sharing their action platforms. I will just share that in Manhattan here, the parish of St. Francis Xavier has an action platform that you can look up at this website, where they are committed to transforming their parish to a zero carbon parish by 2030. This is an ambitious goal. They have a plan. I bet you they will accomplish it. There are these goals around the world. So this is a tremendous initiative that is making a real difference. There is the Laudato Si Animators Program, which I have been privileged to serve for 3 years. And this is a way to learn more about care of God's creation in company, again, with people of faith and people of goodwill around the world. It's an educational program that invites people to learn more about Laudato Si, about how to take action, about our faith, etc. So it's a little course. You can enroll in it. It takes place in 8 languages. In the US, there's the Catholic Climate Covenant, etc. An extraordinary initiative going on in our church is a series of discussions lifting up September 1st from a World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation and considering whether there should be a solemnity of creation, a new feast, a new solemnity that reverences creation. This is an amazing, amazing proposal. So truly much can be done. Truly much is being done. Transformations are happening all over the world. I have only spoken about the church. You can see incredible amounts of change in the B corporations that are seeking to be sustainable, in schools and universities that are changing their ways. It's a wave that we're not going to be able to turn back. So how can we nourish our capacity to enter into this journey of change and take it to heart, especially recognizing the overwhelming nature of the problem, the reality that so many of us have, who doesn't, commitments, jobs, family members, sick friends. We all have many, many things to take care of. Where do we find the energy? Where do we find that hope and inspiration? Something that really inspires me is the vision of the candle flame at the Easter Vigil, where we pass that hope on to each other. And what is a theological foundation, I believe, for our path forward, is a reconciliation with finitude. All of us have 24 hours in the day. We need them for sleep, for work, to eat and relax. We cannot dedicate ourselves, most of us, to being full-time climate activists. So we are finite. We can't do everything, but we do have choices. There are some things we can do, and we share God's creativity and are called to participate in the ongoing creation. We can prioritize some gifts of action, some advocacy, some shift of convenience, and prioritize those changes over some of the less important things that we do out of love for God's creation, our brothers and sisters in the family of life, and future generations. And so creative sacrifice is the image of the canonic God. And this is something that is worth some reflection. That we, in our lives, as finite, have to make sacrificial choices. But we know that sacrifice does not mean suffering. It does not mean a loss. It is a choice to make holy. It is a choice to lift up, and sanctify that which we value most. The health and well-being of our families, our communities, our beautiful Mother Earth, the creation God has given us. And so we know that self-giving is creative and rooted in the deepest mystery of Trinitarian creation, the teaching of kenosis, the giving up of divine glory by the eternal Son when he becomes incarnate, and the self-emptying of God, the triune creator, in the very process of making space for creation. And we are the image of that creative God, of that self-emptying God, that giving and renewing God. So we are called to the same creative self-giving in order to care for the planet, yet knowing that we are finite, we have to prioritize our decisions and work together with others in the church or whatever our community is, so that we have the support and the sustenance to continue on this path. One aspect of our kenotic loving that is very much called for right now is truly profound listening. And I speak as a citizen of the United States, where we are in a polarized and conflicted culture with a lot of anger and hurt on many sides. And in order to engage a true conversation that can lead to a true conversion and a moving forward as a community towards the care for creation we all want to see, we need to have a sacrificial putting aside of our own opinions. We need to be able to truly listen to the other, allow their hurt, allow their perspective to be heard, to honor that. And if that means we don't get a chance to share our own opinions in this particular conversation, this is actually, I believe, as pragmatic as it may sound, one of the most profound needs we have in the church and in society. Maybe it's not so pragmatic. We've been going through a multi-year synodal process reflecting exactly this dynamic of deep listening to bring a new life forward, to bring new connections forward in our community and allow people the space and the trust to work together to heal our communities. So in this theology of co-creation, I wish to urge us to know that it is a grace to be troubled by the specter of climate instability. If you feel that pain rising up in your heart, that's a grace. That is the Holy Spirit calling us to care for creation. And to embrace that vocation is affirming our identity as being imago Dei, in the image of the self-giving God. And what Pope Francis repeatedly reminds us is that this is a journey of joy. We have a larger vision. We are writing a larger story. God is present to each being, and creation is ongoing. Christ is present to every being surrounding it and blessing it. So we should be grateful for God's loving gift of creation and of ourselves, who are beloved children of God. So we see these seeds growing in the world. Maybe they're the mustard seeds, and we're all being invited to say a yes to these paths of action, whatever may be the right path for you. And in a very Ignatian spirit, one might consider, what are my gifts? What are the needs of the time? What am I good at? And what brings me joy? Because there is plenty to do for everyone. The harvest is plenty and laborers are few. And there are so many ways to join in the great work that is already happening. Widely evident, we can see the tide turning, I do believe. So I offer you a moment to reflect on how your charism, vocation, personal hopes, or mission is deepened by the call to all of us for ecological conversion. And we can rejoice knowing that the gospel of creation is proclaimed not just to the human brothers and sisters, but to every creature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Coming back. I don't see any questions yet in the chat box. So I can also invite you, if your preference is to raise your hand, if we can identify you, then Matthew will ask you to unmute or help you unmute your mic, and you can offer your reflection or question. I just want to start by, I guess I was thinking, as you were talking, I feel, throughout this entire series, and I think I'm not alone in this, the massive task before us, and the littleness of what it means to be a human being. And I was wondering, this is a question that came tonight. I mean, have humans ever faced such an existential threat in the history of humanity and managed to um, marshal the resources of all humanity to overcome it? I can't, I wish, so I guess I wish we had an analogy for this. I wish we could say, oh yes, there was a time in like blah, blah, blah. And, with the Black Plague was or something, where all human beings marshal their resources and they were over to do this, able to do this. I mean, I know sometimes I look at um, just, you know, pictures of the amount of plastic that's out there in the ocean, the size of Texas. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, throwing, not using this one plastic bottle, what is that going to do? So I guess I just feel, even after all of this time, an overwhelming sense of inadequacy and powerlessness in the face of so much that is going on. And I'm part of a congregation of people who are trying very hard, but and I do have faith in humanity, but um, it's still, I can feel myself saying, after 5 webinars and listening very carefully to everyone, you still feel impotent in the face of so much, and you wonder if your small contribution um, is really going to matter in the outcome. Because you talked about just the misleading notion of your carbon footprint, and you think about controlling the media and the communication.
Yeah.
um, we don't have that capacity just yet. I mean, you're working on it, and you talked about international organizations, but anyway, I'm going to stop there. But it's just, I don't think I'm alone in feeling that, and I'm wondering if anybody else here who's listening tonight feels the same way, or
Well,
if you felt it yourself.
yeah, I think of Archimedes' screw, right? Or lever. Give
Right.
me the right place to stand and I can move the world. So it's a question of getting your lever at the fulcrum point where it will make the most difference. Don't focus on tossing out your water bottles. Don't buy them in the first place, but don't focus on that. Instead, every time you're tempted to make a trip down to the grocery store and bring back your plastic bags, pick up the phone, call your congressperson and say, what progress are you making on eliminating the production of plastics in my state, in this region? Just shift your activity.
Mhm.
Focusing on little things like recycling, it's not a productive activity. It's far more productive to take those same 5 minutes and don't click the little survey that comes in the email to email, your congressman. You can do that. Pick up the phone. It literally takes 5 minutes. I've timed it. I've done it as a test to see, okay, if I get this invitation to make a call on an important piece of legislation, it really takes 5 minutes. So we need to shift our mindset from the impotent actions to the important actions. And so that's why I think it's important to shift the paradigm from the carbon footprint. Of course, I'm not saying go take 800 airplane flights and start eating beef every day. No, we don't want to do that. But what's really transformative is to focus on the advocacy footprint, which includes education, right? We need to educate others so they can join us in these cultural changes and in these advocacy changes, because that's what's going to change the structures. To change your electricity source, to request clean energy in your apartment or your home, that's transformative, because it means that the utility knows its customers want clean energy. So
Mhm.
that's powerful to do that. So it's a matter of finding the actions that are transformative. And for me, I believe those are switching your energy source, changing your investments into clean investments and into clean banking, because these are the banks that are funding the fossil fuel activities. Reducing your meat and dairy intake actually is very transformative. That is a big step. So that's very important. And then picking up the phone and letting your congressperson know you want a report from them on how they are working towards the clean economy. That's the best 5 minutes you can spend. It really is. Then I would furthermore say, get a group together to encourage you to keep acting, because it's lonely work if you're doing it by yourself, and it can be depressing. So I would say, join the Laudato Si movement and join a chapter, join a circle, or if you have a congregational ecological committee, that is wonderful, that's nourishing and supporting. And that's how things get done, by meeting on a regular basis, by setting a goal. And the Laudato Si Action Platform is an audacious goal. We as Catholics can be very proud of this system. There is no other faith-based system that is as comprehensive across sectors and is rigorous and metrics-based as this. It's basically an LED for every aspect of life, promoted to the entire global community. So join the Laudato Si Action Platform.
Thank you. I think, Sister Peggy Fanning, you had your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and let us hear your question? Matthew, can you help Peggy?
I got it. Okay.
Hi, Peggy. Thank you.
Thank you. I lost the picture here. I got a message. My internet's unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're quite stable, Peggy.
My internet. But the thing is, thank you for this data. The scientific facts are paralyzing enough. And then when you relate it to the kenosis of God, it is totally challenging and wonderful. So thank you so much.
Anyone else out there?
I guess thank you, Sister Peggy, and to put what you said together with Sister Maria's original question. I mean, has humanity ever faced a crisis like this? I mean, this is a big one. The plague, right? We can talk about a biological level issue. The plague killed an awful lot of people, and for sure, Europe's cultural and existential life was completely changed. The earthquake in Lisbon, that devastated society. So yes, there have been massive disasters facing World War II, World War I, facing the world before. Those didn't affect the geology and the atmospheric stability of the planet. So one could argue this is of a qualitatively different nature. However, for me and my faith, that's not the important piece. For me, I believe this is just a larger stage that God is giving us to enact the responsibility and the free will and the creativity God wants us to demonstrate. And we are given the respect, I guess, to take on a very big challenge. When the Catechism says we are co-creators, that is a very loaded term, right? We have a significant responsibility. We are altering the geology of the planet, but I believe this is a risk God is taking, just like every parent gives their child the risk of eventually walking to school by themselves to see, have we learned to truly love and cherish the planet? And I believe we will. And I believe that God will always be the creator, holding Mother Earth in God's hands, just like Julian's little hazelnut. So it's quite a drama. And as always, there is suffering and loss of life of untold magnitudes. And that is our condition on this broken world. But I do feel we are going to come into tomorrow's world with a healed planet and with a new sense of our role to be gardeners.
Elizabeth Hill has raised her hand. Elizabeth, you want to unmute?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm really struggling with this because on the one hand, I'm very inspired. First of all, I become very anxious about this whole thing. And then I become very inspired by you, Doctor, because you really have put out hope for us and laid a path, I think, that gives us sense that there is a brighter future than perhaps some of us might have thought. But I look back at history and I say, well, there have been such things as ice ages. And we know that there are parts of the planet which are now deserts that were once flourishing, almost tropical climates, that these have been normal and natural progressions from one type of climate to another. And I guess the difference now, of course, is that because of our ability to make things worse, we're accelerating this pace.
Right.
And also the impact, because the population has gotten so much larger than it was, say, back 2 trillion years ago, when there might have been several thousand people on the planet as opposed to billions. But I guess my basic question is, no matter what we do, will this change eventually, inevitably happen? Or can we really make it not happen?
Well, I'm just going to cite the wisdom of my own mother. The future is uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mothers are always right.
Mothers are always right. And it's our calling to care for the garden, not knowing what's going to happen to it. And this is a beautiful aspect of Jewish eco-spirituality. And some of you may be aware of the teaching. I don't think it's in the Hebrew scriptures. I think it's in one of their other rabbinic sets of doctrines, that if you are planting a fruit tree and you are called to go to war, finish planting the fruit tree and then go to war, because maybe you will come back and you will want that fruit tree, right? So I think we're here to care for the fruit trees.
Okay.
We don't know the outcome. I believe God is creator. I don't believe God is going to let go of being creator. And as I see it, that entails a creation. It's a creation groaning for sure. But this is what we are called to do, to learn how to be better and better guardians and gardeners. And that also means living in justice with each other, because it's exploitation and overconsumption that is really driving this crisis. So as we learn to live in peace and simplicity and honor the needs of all, this is part of the gardening, as of course you all know. So will we hit a tipping point and lose all our glaciers? I don't know. Nobody knows.
Anyone else? Erin, I'd like to ask this. You know, you're very proud, obviously, of the work that the church is doing. You said, I think, that the Laudato Si action platform is one of the most comprehensive approaches just from of all the world's religions. How do you, what do you do with that reality and then the reality that Dan DeLeo described last month, which is
Yeah.
out of the 178, I still have my notes from last week somewhere. Out of the 178 dioceses in the United States, only about 30 or 32 kind of pay lip service to the Laudato Si platform, and only two, John Stowe down in Kentucky and somebody I think in Indiana, I mean, or actively involving their dioceses in an action platform. I mean, and I ask you that because at one point you said in your presentation tonight, you know, how shall they hear without a preacher, right? So isn't the church, shouldn't the church be in the United States, be at the forefront of all of this? And
Mhm.
how do you live with that uh, disconnect between what the church, on the one hand, is saying in the Laudato Si platform, and what the local U.S. bishops are? I don't know if they are they are being what you would call willfully ignorant about all of this. I mean, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, that's a really entangled question, and there's no single answer to that. There are multiple dynamics going on in that problem. Um, for one thing, around the world, some continents are just seeing more impacts, like that double globe I showed you.
Right.
So the Filipino bishops are very well aware of how climate change is just washing over their islands on a weekly basis. So they're on board with climate change action. We in this country have been possibly more protected as part of the global north until these past couple of years when we're seeing wildfires, et cetera. So up till recently, it's been easier to say, oh, climate change is over there. And then, it's out of sight, out of mind, not anything to worry about. On a deeper ideological perspective, it goes back to the worldviews and the framing point of view. So we know that one's political leanings are the most determinative factor for environmental views. One's environmental views correlate with political views. So if we have a conservative clergy person, they will have one set of environmental views. If we have a liberal clergy person, they will have another set of environmental views. That tracks across every person in the US and many other cultures as well. We also have a unique situation. I don't know how unique it is, but it's certainly highly operative in the United States, of an alliance of neoliberal capitalism and conservative Catholicism that's influential in some areas, and that has been studied as well. And so sadly, we all know Catholic social teaching as the best kept secret. Well, it really is. Despite all our efforts in our Catholic colleges and universities and Catholic high schools, where we are teaching our young people about justice and Catholic social teaching, boy, it does remain a secret. And in our American culture, doesn't matter if you're Catholic or not, we're all aware of the triumphant place of capitalism. And on top of that, of course, the fossil fuel companies have put out their greenwashing to convince us that They are essential to a good life, and they're essential to the well-being of the poor, which is the most insidious and offensive statement ever, because the poor globally are being so undermined by the impacts of fossil fuel pollution. Another dimension is kind of the division of labor that many clergy see. The clergy have a sacramental mission. And of course, with so few priests, okay, it does seem if someone's going to perform the sacraments under our current, structures, the priests have that sacramental mission. I've heard more than once, the environment is for the laity to take care of. That's their project. I'm on sacraments and, of course, parish management. And we all know that parish management, diocesan management, it's hit more than a few hurdles and absorbed church energy in some really big ways. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about. The other issue goes back to the unbelievable significance of scientific literacy. In my interviews, in my focus groups, in my research, scientific literacy is the factor that correlates the most with climate change concern. And it makes perfect sense. If you're not aware that there's an actual problem that science explains and verifies, why on earth would you be bothered? That would be like me being bothered about a, green-toothed, spotted bear under my sofa. It's not there. I've never heard of it. Who knows? Why should I worry about it? This science, it wasn't taught to me in high school. It wasn't. The vast majority of our clergy are older than me, went to high school before I did. They did not learn this science in high school. They didn't learn it in the seminary either. So why should we expect them to be concerned about climate change? They have not had a preacher. Good point. And of course, then there are the relative priorities of different advocacy aims that our Conference of Catholic Bishops prioritizes. So it's a complex issue, it's multifactorial, and I think the answer is indeed let the laity get up and go. And if you're feeling what I call the green blues, because believe me, I have had the green blues. I have the green blues. The only way to get rid of them is to take action. And when you do, you feel so much better. I really say, sign up for the Animators Program, join the Laudato Si or find friends and do your own thing, whatever it is, and you will feel better. And you are making a difference, and talk about it. Don't just do it quietly. Don't put your candle under a bushel basket. You want your sister-in-law and your neighbor and your dentist and the person at the the bakery, everybody to know, oh, look what I have. I am now doing X and Y because I just feel it's a good way for the planet and I feel good about it. And we have to verbalize this so people can see our lights on a bushel basket, not to be the moral zealot. That doesn't work. And we can't be the liberal who's drunk the know-it-all Kool-Aid and has the answer for everything, because nobody likes that either. And people dismiss us. But the culture won't change unless people hear, oh, she's doing that. He's doing that. I could do that. I don't have to buy, strawberries in December. I can stop doing that. She doesn't. I can get a rag bag. I don't need to purchase paper towels. He called his congressperson and had a good conversation. I could do that. So we have to talk about it. And I truly believe that when we start taking action, we'll find hope And this idea of creative sacrifice is make the time for it by sacrificing something less important, because we're all living in a 24/7 day. We can't add one more thing in. We have to take something less important out so that we honor ourselves and our time and our energy as well, as part of this garden and ecosystem.
Anyone else? Well, we're just a couple of minutes beyond our regular closing time, but you've been inspirational. I want everybody who's here tonight to know that when I was thinking about putting this webinar together, the person that I spoke with was Erin. I was introduced to her by Beth Johnson, who was one of her 2 mentors at Fordham University. And it's been a wonderful collaboration with Erin. She encouraged me to do this program, participated in this program herself, and has been a great support and cheerleader for what we've been doing for the last 4 months here in Spirit Alive. So I thank you in a very special way for all of your support. I thank everyone who has participated, whether you are here tonight going to listen to the recording in a group on Monday or in another part of the world, for participating in this community of concern. That's what we really are. We're a community of concern. We might be frightened, we might be sometimes cynical, but we wouldn't be here except that we are truly concerned for what is going on in the world around us. So let us continue to be concerned, and let us take from the season of Advent the virtue and the promise of hope that God is constantly with us, that Advent is always with us. It's the perennial season because God is always coming into our world to do good things, to make it new. So everyone, happy Merry Christmas, and have a peaceful and blessed Advent. And Erin, I'll see you next week. Thank you all so much. Good night now. God bless. Thank you, Erin.